Gears 2 is an incredibly broken game in multiplayer. Barrier breakers, crab walking, dummying, and so much more. However, these are all things that require an online connection, preferably with a bit of lag. But did you know that the single-player campaign is just as broken? The Gears 2 speedrun is filled with insane tricks, skips, and techniques to save tons of time. First, we'll start off with some of the basic principles used throughout the game. Then, we'll go over the big skips and all the out-of-bounds shenanigans that are part of the main speedrun route. And finally, we'll take a look at the myriad of other glitches that are being explored by the community. Let's go. Deuces, bitch!
See you in later, Dom. I have to get back to control.
The first technique happens just seconds into the game. Plenty of folks already know that you can cancel the long dialogue sequences where Marcus has his finger in his ear by simply pressing the back button and telling everyone to shut up. However, this doesn't work on the other kind of dialogue in the game where Delta Squad is just talking amongst themselves or with nearby characters in the environment. While we can't skip these sections entirely, we can still skip everything Marcus says by jamming an active reload as soon as he starts a voice line. This realization shortens some of the slowest parts in the game and makes them more bearable in a run. There's a little known secret kept by Gears 2 multiplayer gamers. Dodge rolling, or evading as the game calls it, is much faster than roadie running. This means that if you interleave dodge rolls with roadie running, your movement in a straight line is much faster than normal. On average, this technique saves 10 to 15% on all the long running sections in the game. That's a big deal alone, but it also lets us squeeze out even more time in places where every split second is crucial. At the beginning of the game when we're leaving the hospital, the optimized movement helps us get away from the heavy hitters on the street who would certainly take us down otherwise. In Act 2, there's an E-hole that can be skipped if we're quick enough to run past where it appears and blocks the way out. When we get swallowed by the riftworm, it lets us barely one-cycle the teeth without getting crushed, and makes running by the acid spitters without shooting them much safer. With this movement, we can also set up for some cool strats. In Act 3, we can run past all the sires that are erupting from their stasis tanks and run all the way to the end. Once we tap the big red wheel, Dom will get teleported up to us and block the mob of sires that are trying to rush us down. This allows us to quickly kill the majority with a double frag and clean up the stragglers. In Act 5, there's a skip where we have to get in front of this car to boost us up above the terrain, but the timing is pretty tight to get there before the parking deck collapses and leaves us on our own. Even when we're not dodge roll running, we can still be smart about our movement and what we choose to interact with to save even more time. In Act 3, where the Razor Hail starts storming down, we can move swiftly between the canopies, stopping to grab a Boomshield off the first Mauler, and then simply walking away from all the other enemies until the hail turns to rain. Right after that, when we drive the Centaur up the icy Mount Kadar, we can just blow past the majority of the enemy-filled outposts along the way. In Act 4, when you're helping Dom search for Maria, all of the consoles except the very first and very last are completely optional. We of course take the faster paths on all the left-right split decisions in the game. We even found out that for most of these big red wheels, you can get away with turning them only about 3/4 of the way before you can pass under the gates that they control. So in summary, we have trimmed as much fat as possible, but now it's time for the meat and potatoes. The first class of Gears 2 skips that I'll cover is movement-based skips. These are ones that require either very precise inputs or abuse weird angles and collisions. The first few are relatively simple, but serve to demonstrate these concepts. Near the start of the game while running through the hospital, there's a King Raven that crashes through the roof and jerks your attention away from the action, rendering you useless and vulnerable. When you round the corner, you can time a dodge roll that prevents this loss of focus so that you can keep running past the enemies in a flow. In Act 2, after a small holdout fight, you need to activate a grind lift to burrow through the wall and get to the other side. You can dodge roll in on the right-hand side of the tunnel that's forming to get ahead of the grind lift. This saves a few extra seconds, as you don't need to wait for the grind lift to move out of the way at the end. After being swallowed by the giant riftworm, there comes a part where you have to run away from a giant ball of debris or be flattened by what the worm is eating. Usually, you have to take a somewhat winding path because of the lethal spikes and invisible barriers that prevent going in a straight line. But there are a few places that can be skipped. You can safely cut the corner in this middle section before sawing open the membrane that blocks the way. Walk into the spikes instead of going around to open up the next area slightly earlier. Then, instead of the intended path on the left, we can shoot down this truck to form a bridge that also removes an invisible barrier that would normally block us from running through the spikes. Okay, from here on out, all the skips get a lot cooler and save way more time. Next up is the train skip. As soon as you make it back outside from the enemy-filled facility in Act 3, the game expects you to hop aboard the Auto-Scroll Express to make it even further in the level. Falling Razor Hail is supposed to prevent you from bypassing this, but of course, speedrunners found a way. If you line up with the border of the stairs, you can run out at a slight angle and make it to the outer edge of the nearby building. This is just barely in the safe zone from the hail, and any small mistake in pathing can end up in getting instantly torn to shreds. While we're waiting to heal up, we move along the safe zone to a point where we can re-enter into the game's expected path. Then we just climb into the stationary train car and continue the level as usual. I teased about this one earlier on in the movement section. In Act 5, when you take the right path to clear out the garage, you can run to the front of this car as soon as the parking deck collapses to get boosted up on top of the terrain. Once you're there, you can carefully walk over the barriers that would block you and hop down back into the map, proceeding as usual. This skips having to clean up the random enemies on the streets and the extra ones that spawn. There's also another way to skip this section, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. The next skip could be the most impactful one in the entire run. In Act 2, Delta Squad is searching for prisoners on these torture barges. A short while after we start the barge's locomotion, our barge crashes into another one. For some reason, the collisions on our barge get messed up by the impact, allowing us to ramp off of these fins and get up out of bounds. From here, we have two options. If we go to the right, making sure to stay on top of the fins and invisible barrier, we can walk over to the side of the Troika turret, nudge off and drop down to the lower deck. Then we can make our way to the far edge, drop down again, this time with a back roll when we start falling to get completely out of the map. From here, you can find the edge of the terrain to drop off once again, teleporting you up to the cliffside that's supposed to come after exploring the second barge. This was the first method for barge skip that was used until we discovered a new way. So backing up a bit, if we go to the left now, we can again walk on top of the fins and invisible barriers, transferring to the second barge by its Troika turret, and instead of dropping down here, we walk all the way along the edge, up to the barge's big mechanical legs, so that we can fall out of bounds without the need to drop to the lower deck first. Once we're out, we just turn and run up the hill, clip through and step down from this rock face, then lining up with a certain pointy spot in the terrain, we jump off into the void, throwing in a couple dodge rolls for aerial positioning, and then we get teleported all the way down to the bottom of the hill, away from the cliff from where we would have ended up before. This version of the skip saves an extra 25 to 30 seconds from the original method, but how much does barge skip save for the whole run? Well, it skips searching the second barge for prisoners. Yeah, that includes Ty, he's still in there in the speedrun lore. Maybe it's better that way. It skips an obnoxious uphill fight to get off the barge, and it also skips the triggers for loading in every single other fight, all the way up to the burning building where we evac from. Because it's such a long section, being able to forget about enemies and focus on getting crisp dodge roll movement here is huge. Overall, barge skip saves a massive amount of time. A couple of weeks ago, this would have been the main strat for this part of the speedrun, but a member of the community just found an even bigger skip that skips the barge skip.
Great! Nice one.
That takes us into our next section, knockdown-based skips. Now, there are only a few things in Gears 2 that ever knock a player down. Concussive smoke grenades in multiplayer prior to Title Update 4, uncharged mortar shells that explode nearby, and just a handful of scripted events in the campaign. Once knocked down, players can get sent up into the air or through terrain and gain access to unintended areas.
I don't believe that you have access to this part of the facility.
When entering the sunken city of Ilima, there's a mortar launcher that's sneakily tucked into an easily overlooked corner. If you rebound an uncharged shell off the short cover in front, you can get knocked down into the corner, and when the collision's fully resolved, you'll be boosted up on top of the terrain. From here, it takes just a little bit of maneuvering to hop down fully out of bounds. Now, this out of bounds is massive, but for the skip, we run all the way down past the floating buildings, go straight through the one that's at the top of this hill, clip our way into the burning building, and run to this exact spot by the broken windows so that the game loads a slope so that we can keep walking out. Once we walk out far enough, the game will now deload the slope, causing us to fall down, jitter around a little bit, and then teleport us back into the map. This conveniently places us next to the stairs of the building that we run to at the end of Barge Skip. Whoa. Overall, this skips the long, eventless run after the Barge Skip, the stand-still, do-nothing holdout fight where you reunite with Cole, and even rescuing Baird from the Iron Maiden. Someone will have to go back for him too. This is an insane find, and it definitely opens up my last world record for contention. There's one more skip that's been found with the help of mortar knockdowns, but it also requires the next method of skips. Act 4 introduces us to Boomshields, large metal shields that can be planted into the ground as a kind of mobile cover. When planted next to certain walls in the game, we can climb over the shield to penetrate through the wall and get to the other side. In Act 4, there's this huge room filled with maulers, therons, and more. Usually, we have to kill everything in this room to gain access to the elevator and proceed to the lower level. If we quickly steal a boom shield off of one of the maulers, we can place it on the edge of the elevator shaft and just jump down. Once we're down here, we would normally be blocked by this fence until we kill the enemies that spawn to guard the area. The problem is, they don't spawn because by not activating the elevator, we miss the trigger that's supposed to bring them in. Here's where the mortars come into play. We can grab the mortar launcher on the upper path, walk down and rebound a shot off the wall, and try to angle a knockdown straight through the fence. From here, we can continue the run as usual, just without our teammates for a bit. Now, it's hard to say how much time this actually saves. The lineup to get through the fence is a bit tricky, and jumping down the elevator shaft is actually very risky as the enemies upstairs absolutely slap. But if someone were to hit this in a full run first try, with good luck above, it might save a minute or two. After we help Dom find Maria, there's a fight with a bunch of enemies at the top of this short tower and strong reinforcements that follow up. We can instead run to the door where the reinforcements come from and jump through completely free. Early in the video, we talked about the movement-based version of skipping a fight right after the Act 5 parking garage. There's also a method for this using the Boomshield. Normally, you can't climb over cover while holding a Boomshield. This means we shouldn't be able to carry a Boomshield past this point, but we can actually plant our shield through the fence on the side and pick it up after dealing with the enemies. Once we have our shield again, we wait for the parking deck to collapse and simply plant our shield through the barrier to jump through to the other side. Continuing on from here, we immediately set up for another massive trick. We can either pick up our shield that we used to jump over, or we can kill the Mauler in the dusty street and grab his. Either way, once we have a shield, we can plant it through the fallen column and jump through just like we've been doing. Unlike other skips so far though, we're going to reuse that shield here in a moment. First, we run down to the edge of the construction area. If we drop down from the ledge, we won't be able to climb back up, so our shield is gone for good. However, if we stay on top and do a series of precise rolls, we can hit the checkpoint trigger to load the next area without falling down. Once we've done that, we now turn around and run all the way back to our shield. This time, the majority of the previous area is now deloaded, which lets us plant a shield on the side and jump over into the abyss. If angled correctly, we teleport to a much later part of the level, but do need to backtrack slightly to hit a load trigger. Once the enemies spawn, we're free to finish up the level normally. Now this skips the long sequence of using a crane to carry Dom across the gap, and several long fights along the way until the floor collapses from the combat. The last skip for today is on the spiral stairs next to the toaster Easter egg. If we line up our planted shield just right on the side of these flaming torches, we can climb up on top of them and get out of the map. Once we're here, we can certainly roam around a little bit to explore, but if we simply back up a bit, when the game deloads the area, we can instantly roll in and drop down to a lower level of the spiral staircase. This skips the triggers for the first set of enemies, and if you can hit it quickly, we'll save a bit of time. We've been experimenting with ways to instead drop down to the room after the spiral staircase, but we haven't quite worked our way in there just yet. Speaking of experiments, let's talk about some of the other hotspots for glitch hunting and skip finding. In Act 3, there's a doorway that bursts open with a ton of wretches. For some reason, if we angle our camera straight up and dodge roll back, we get teleported to the very beginning of the level. We do end up returning here after the Razor Hill section, so if we could figure out how to hit the right triggers before teleporting back, it might save a ton of time. Unfortunately, the interior of the facility doesn't load correctly after doing the glitch. We found out that when we're passing through here the first time, we can plant a frag to keep some of the area loaded during the back in time glitch, but it hasn't worked on anything beyond there. The Centaur driving section is one of the most boring parts of the game. We can actually ramp off of these rocks toward the end of the outdoor section to get kind of out of bounds with the tank. But even though we can get on top of the buildings on the other side, we can't seem to progress much further. Maybe there's a secret path we're missing somewhere. At the end of Act 3, when you enter the underground, there's eventually a 5-minute auto-scroller on the boat. If we can find a way to skip any of this, it's going to be focused on this gunboat that crashes ashore a few moments prior. Getting out of bounds is simple enough. Just walk up to the right of where you would normally cross and hop down. This lets us explore a small area under the boat and a flooded area over to the side. Unfortunately, we need to be going the other way if we want to get out into the open waters. At the beginning of Act 5, when you get to this bridge, if you're quick enough when the gate drops, you can roll through it before the collisions load in. Alternatively, you can get on the edge border and use the columns below to hop down. This is an enormous out of bounds that goes across nearly the entire chapter and has tons of scenic views. As cool as it is, it doesn't seem to lead to any sort of speedrun strat. The end of this chapter is killing the 2 Brumaks at the end, but this glitch skips the set of triggers that would load that fight in. If we were to continue through that level properly and get to the holdout fight, we can use some very tight movement to get on top of the edge border and hop down to the ground level where the Locusts are spawning. After taking care of the initial forces, the Brumaks spawn, and while messing around trying to see if I could frag tag them, this happened. Can you frag tag a Brumak? Ooh, we can try. Wait, if you can, it's like worth it. Whoa! Deuces, bitch! I'm not convinced that this is much faster than staying up top and using the heavy weapons that are provided to you, but there are a few places earlier in the level that also let you get out in the same way. Maybe there's a way to combine this with the bridge method. Alright, now there are a few other weird spots that we know about, but of course none of them have actually yielded fruit. If you stuck around this long, you probably enjoyed the video, so you might also enjoy the other video about Gears 1 glitches. Also, on my stream, I've been working on a Gears 5 challenge that might interest you as well.
I peaked for 0.0 negative seconds.
But alright, so dudes, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.